You never really know when your life is about to take a turn. For Mara Bennett, that moment came on a raw, windswept Saturday morning at the Willow County livestock auction, when the crowd's laughter felt sharper than the prairie wind, and the air smelled of dust, sweat, and fear. People didn't expect much from Mara these days, certainly not a scene. She kept to herself, her former life as the town's vet now something people only whispered about, usually when they thought she couldn't hear. She parked her faded Chevy pickup in a line of newer trucks and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, pulling her old canvas jacket tight. The auction yard buzzed with voices, ranchers, horse traders, farm hands, a handful of teenagers dangling sodas and smirks. She made her way toward the pens, ignoring the stares, the not-so-subtle tilts of ball caps as people recognized her. "That's Mara Bennett," someone murmured, as if she might spook. Inside the barn, rows of makeshift stalls held the day's offerings: Herefords, quarter horses, the odd donkey, a few goats. The last pen, shunted off to one side, held a mustang, a battered, mud-spattered gelding, ribs visible beneath his patchy coat, a limp in his left hind leg. Mara stopped. Something in the mustang's eyes caught her. Not just fear, but a kind of angry, wounded dignity. He watched her approach, nostrils flaring, ready to bolt if he could. A familiar voice drawled behind her. "You thinking of saving that one, Doc?" Mara turned to see Walt Hardison, the biggest rancher in 3 counties, boots polished, hat pristine, the sort of man whose opinion people didn't argue with. He grinned, flashing 2 white teeth. "Hate to see you waste good feed. That horse has got more problems than the town council." Mara didn't answer. She studied the mustang, saw the half-healed scars on his legs, the swollen knee, the way he kept his weight off the bad leg, but still faced the world, head up. For a split second, Mara thought of walking away. She didn't have a lot of money left, and everyone here knew it. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. Not today. The auctioneer's voice crackled through the loudspeakers, calling everyone to gather. As the bidding began, the Mustang's pen became the stage for the town's little drama. Walt started things off low, joking with his buddies, $5 to send him to pasture. A few others tossed in bids, mostly for fun, driving the price up by 5s and 10s, like it was a game. Mara stayed silent, hands jammed in her jacket, waiting. "25, Walt called out. Laughter. "30, from a wiry old man in the back, voice half mocking. 40. Mara's voice was quiet but firm, heads turned. Walt raised an eyebrow. 45. Mara didn't blink. 50. Someone in the crowd snickered. "She's out of her mind." Walt shook his head. 60. "But you're just buying trouble, Mara." 70. A hush spread through the barn. The auctioneer paused, looking at Mara like she'd grown a second head. 70. "Do I hear 75? Walt studied her, searching for the limit. 75. 100, Mara said, and the barn fell silent. Even the Mustang seemed to sense something had shifted. He took a step closer to the gate, ears pricked forward. The auctioneer let the silence stretch. 100 going once. Going twice. Sold! The gavel smacked the table, sharp as a gunshot. As Mara walked to the office to sign the paperwork, she could feel every eye on her. She heard Walt mutter, "That's a waste of good feed, Doc. He won't last a month." Mara ignored him. She pulled out her checkbook with hands that only shook a little, wrote the sum, and tried not to let anyone see how tight her chest felt. Back at the pen, she spoke to the Mustang softly, using the tone she'd once used for wounded animals and frightened children. "Let's get you out of here, Dusty," she said, naming him on the spot. "I know it hurts, but you're coming home, She fetched a lead rope from her truck, careful and slow. Dusty shied at first, the whites of his eyes showing, but didn't rear or bite. Mara coaxed him with an apple, and after a tense minute, he let her slip the halter over his head. The crowd had begun to disperse, disappointment buzzing in their laughter. Someone said, "Crazy old vet, should have let the killer buyers take him." As Mara led Dusty out into the sunlight, the mustang stumbled, almost falling, but caught himself and limped onward. Walt and his friends stood by their trucks, arms folded, watching. "You'll regret this," Walt called. "That horse is done." Mara kept her head high. She helped Dusty up the ramp and into her battered trailer, her heart pounding with worry and something else. Defiance, maybe, or hope. As she drove away, the auction yard grew small in the rearview mirror. The road to her ranch stretched ahead, winding through cottonwoods and scrub. Mara glanced back at Dusty, who stood trembling but upright in the trailer, and whispered, "We'll show them. Second chances aren't wasted on the broken. Not today." What Mara didn't see, as she turned off the main road and toward Willow Creek Ranch, was the look of surprise, almost respect, on Walt's face, or the way gossip would ripple through town before she even reached home. She only knew that her heart was beating in a way it hadn't for years, and for the first time in a long while, she was ready for a fight. The news traveled faster than the prairie wind. By the time Mara and Dusty made it back to Willow Creek Ranch, the story had already made its way through town. Mara Bennett had lost her mind for good, paid $100 for a half-crippled mustang, and maybe was going to lose her ranch next. Mara ignored the swirling rumors. Her focus stayed on Dusty, coaxing him out of the trailer, speaking softly to calm his trembling body. The old barn, with its weathered red paint and the scent of hay and rain-soaked wood, felt like a sanctuary for them both. As Mara led Dusty to an empty stall, she was too absorbed in checking his leg and cleaning his wounds to notice a car pulling up the long gravel drive. The slam of a door and footsteps crunching in the yard finally broke her concentration. She looked up to see Sophie standing there, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, her posture as closed off as ever. "Nice stunt, Mom," Sophie said. Her voice had the brittle edge of someone trying not to care. "Couldn't just buy a puppy like everyone else?" Mara bit back a retort, focusing on Dusty instead. "He needed help, Soph. Would you rather I let him go to slaughter?" Sophie rolled her eyes. "Maybe you could think about not making the same mistakes every time. God, what if you'd gotten hurt? Or what if you lose the ranch because of this?" "People are already talking, Mom," Mara bristled, standing up straighter. "Let them talk. I'm not living my life to keep gossips happy." Sophie stepped closer, anger flashing in her eyes. "No, you're living it to chase after hopeless cases, to prove something no one even asked you to prove. Why can't you ever, just once, think about yourself? Or about us?" The words hung heavy in the air, thicker than the late afternoon humidity. Mara looked at her daughter and saw the teenager she'd lost, angry, hurt, and scared all at once. But Sophie was no teenager now. She was 24, toughened by years away, a survivor in her own right. Mara felt a stab of regret, but didn't know how to bridge the years between them. Before Mara could find the words, a low rumble echoed from the horizon. Storm clouds were piling up fast, black and menacing, and a sudden flash of lightning cracked across the sky. Dusty shifted anxiously, nostrils flaring, the scent of rain and electricity making him restless. The first drops splattered against the barn roof. "We need to get him settled," Mara said, grasping at the practical. "Can you help me with the door?" Sophie hesitated, then shrugged, following her mother into the stall. They worked in tense silence as the rain intensified, the wind howling outside, making the old barn creak and groan. Dusty spooked at every thunderclap, backing into the far wall, eyes rolling with panic. Mara reached for him, her voice calm and steady. "Easy, boy. You're safe here." Sophie watched, torn between irritation and concern. Lightning illuminated Mara's face, sweat mingling with the rain dripping from her hair, her hands steady even as the mustang trembled. Dusty shied away from Sophie at first, but Mara handed her the lead rope. "Just stand here. Let him get used to your scent." Sophie bit her lip but took the rope. She stood still, letting Dusty sniff her hand, whispering, "It's okay, boy. I'm not going to hurt you." The connection was tentative, but real. The mustang stilled, muscles quivering, but he didn't try to escape. Outside, the storm reached its peak. The sky ripped open with light and noise. Rain battered the tin roof. Thunder shook the rafters. And somewhere nearby, a tree branch cracked and crashed to the ground. The three of them, woman, daughter, horse, stood together in the flickering half-dark, hearts pounding in rhythm with the tempest outside. Mara looked at Sophie, her voice softer. "I know you think I'm reckless. Maybe I am. But sometimes the lost causes are the ones who need us most. Isn't that what you used to believe too?" Sophie's jaw tightened. "People change, Mom. Life changes you." Mara sighed, wishing she could reach across the divide. "Maybe. Or maybe we forget the reasons we cared in the first place." The barn door rattled, loose hinges squealing. Mara hurried to secure it, Sophie helping without being asked. They worked together in the dim light, moving hay bales to block drafts, refilling Dusty's water, brushing the worst of the mud from his coat. Gradually, the old rhythms returned, the shared language of chores, small talk, silent understanding. For a moment, the years of pain and silence faded, replaced by the familiar comfort of working side by side. When the storm finally eased, rain still pattering, but the thunder rolling farther away, Mara slumped onto a bale of hay, exhausted. Sophie sat beside her, arms wrapped around her knees. "I didn't come back for this," Sophie said quietly, staring at the rain-soaked yard. I heard what people were saying, and I couldn't let you do something stupid again." Mara smiled, weary but grateful. "Well, I'm glad you're here, even if you're just here to talk sense into me." A reluctant smile tugged at Sophie's lips. "Don't get used to it." They fell into silence, listening to Dusty munching hay, the wind rattling the barn's tin roof, the distant sound of a coyote yipping at the storm's passing. Mara reached out, covering Sophie's hand with her own. "I missed you," she whispered. Sophie didn't pull away, but she didn't respond either. For now, that was enough. As night fell, the power flickered and died, plunging the ranch into darkness save for a single flashlight's beam. Mara and Sophie checked the barn one last time before heading inside, sharing a blanket of unease, exhaustion, and the tiniest flicker of hope. The storm had passed, but they both knew another one was waiting, one that had nothing to do with the weather, and everything to do with second chances. Morning at Willow Creek always carried the scent of dew and clover, but today there was a new tension in the air. Mara rose before dawn, the old ache in her shoulder reminding her she wasn't as young as she used to be. She slipped on her boots, grabbed a battered apple from the kitchen bowl, and headed toward the barn, where Dusty waited, wary and silent. The events of the auction, the storm, and Sophie's return all lingered like the mist hanging above the pasture. Mara wondered if the fragile thread holding her daughter here would snap with the sunrise, or if, by some miracle, Sophie might find a reason to stay. Dusty nickered softly as Mara opened the stall door, his large eyes following her every move. His wounds looked raw but cleaner this morning, his limp pronounced but not as guarded. Mara crouched beside him, breaking off pieces of apple, her voice gentle and steady. "Easy, boy. This will help, I promise." She worked slowly, cleaning the crusted mud from his fetlocks, applying ointment to his scrapes. Each time she touched him, Dusty would stiffen, holding himself braced for pain that never came. Mara spoke to him in the same tone she'd used on 1,000 scared animals, telling stories about the ranch, about thunderstorms that left the sky purple, about her old dog Daisy who'd slept by her side every night, about the way the wildflowers burst along the creek every spring. For a long time, Dusty simply stood, trembling. But as Mara's words filled the stall, his muscles loosened. He stretched his neck toward her, nostrils flaring at the scent of apple and, very slowly, accepted a chunk from her open palm. Mara smiled, heart swelling. "There you go, Dusty. We're in no rush." A soft sound made Mara glance over her shoulder. Sophie was standing in the doorway, still in pajamas and her father's old jacket, arms wrapped around herself. She hovered there, half ready to run. "Couldn't sleep?" Mara asked quietly. Sophie shook her head, not meeting her mother's eyes. "He's still here." Mara hid a smile. "Yep, he's not going anywhere." She patted the apple in her palm. "Want to try feeding him?" Sophie hesitated, but curiosity overruled her pride. She stepped forward, moving slow and low, like Mara had taught her as a child. Dusty tensed at first, shying away from the unfamiliar scent, but Sophie waited, patient, holding the apple chunk steady. After a long pause, Dusty took it, lips brushing her fingers. Sophie grinned, a real grin, bright and unexpected. "He's softer than I thought." "He's scared," Mara said, "but he wants to trust. That's a start." Sophie reached out, her hand trembling, and stroked Dusty's neck. The horse snorted, then relaxed beneath her touch. The moment was delicate, a bubble that could burst at any noise, but for now it held. Sophie looked over at her mom, eyes softer than they'd been since she arrived. "He really was a mess, huh?" Mara nodded, biting back the urge to say more. She sensed Sophie's resistance melting, just a little. "We'll take it slow. He needs time. So do we." They worked together in the barn for the next hour, falling into the old rhythm of shared chores. Mara mucked the stalls while Sophie swept, each movement bringing back memories of years when this was their daily routine. Dusty watched them both, his posture still wary but his eyes curious. Later, after breakfast, Sophie lingered in the kitchen, pouring coffee and watching her mother jot notes in an old ledger. The silence was thick, but not angry, just full of things left unsaid. Finally, Sophie cleared her throat. "I'm still planning to leave soon. I have work, and a lease I can't just break." Mara nodded, not looking up. "I know, but I'm glad you're here now." Sophie rolled her eyes, but the edge was gone from her voice. "You always did know how to guilt-trip me." Mara smiled, not apologizing. "I just know you, that's all." In the afternoon, Sophie found herself drifting back out to the barn, unable to resist the pull. She watched Mara sit on an overturned bucket, gently brushing Dusty's mane, humming under her breath. After a moment, Sophie joined her, picking up a soft brush and mimicking her mother's slow, careful strokes. The work was calming. Dusty shifted closer, relaxing into the attention. Sophie's hands moved with the ease of old habit, muscle memory guiding her through the motions. "Remember when we used to do this with Scout?" she murmured. Mara laughed, her eyes bright with nostalgia. "That old mule never liked anyone but you." They fell into laughter, the years of tension easing as memories bubbled up, of trail rides, rodeos, late-night snacks eaten in the barn when storms made sleep impossible. Each story made the work lighter, the air warmer. For the first time in years, the ranch felt like home to Sophie, and the sadness between them softened. By sundown, Dusty was standing taller, his eyes clearer, his fear dulled by trust. Mara watched him nuzzle Sophie's shoulder and knew they'd reached a turning point, not just for the Mustang, but for their family. That night, as crickets sang outside and the moon rose over the fields, Sophie sat by her bedroom window, torn between leaving and staying. She watched Mara's silhouette in the barn, moving with quiet purpose. Sophie felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time: hope. Down in the barn, Mara lingered by Dusty's stall, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "We're going to be okay, boy. One step at a time." For the first time in years, she believed it. The days that followed the storm settled into a gentle rhythm. The ranch felt both familiar and strange, echoes of the past mingling with a fragile sense of possibility. Mara and Sophie moved through their chores side by side, an uneasy truce softening with each sunrise, each small success. The bitter words exchanged in the barn had left bruises, but routine was slowly filling the cracks. Early mornings brought a hush to the world, that sacred time when dew still clung to wild grass and the birds had not yet declared victory over the day. Mara found herself waking up before her alarm, anxious to check on Dusty, eager for the solace of work. She'd pass Sophie in the hallway, both of them bleary-eyed, each quietly grateful for something to do with their hands. Together they moved through the barn, feeding and watering the horses, mucking stalls, checking fences. At first, their conversation was mechanical, a list of tasks, reminders, practical observations about Dusty's limp or the weather. But as days passed, the dialogue shifted, small smiles and shared memories sneaking in between chores. "Do you remember the time Daisy chased the mailman all the way to the gate?" Mara asked one morning, as they brushed Dusty's growing winter coat. Sophie laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Yeah, and you tried to apologize by leaving cookies, but he was terrified for weeks." "Those cookies probably made it worse," Mara admitted, rolling her eyes. It was such a small thing, shared laughter, but it felt monumental. Even Dusty seemed to sense the change. The Mustang's eyes no longer darted in panic when Sophie entered the stall. He greeted them both with quiet snuffles, letting Mara run her hand down his neck, allowing Sophie to clean his hooves, even accepting treats without hesitation. Mara noticed the transformation not just in Dusty, but in her daughter. Sophie was different here, away from the city and the relentless pressure to be strong all the time. Out here among the fields and animals, her guard dropped. She joked more. She lingered over morning coffee. She started looking at Mara, not through her, not past her, but at her. One crisp afternoon, Mara found Sophie in the paddock, leaning against the fence, watching Dusty graze with the other horses. Mara joined her, tucking her hands into her jacket. "He's healing fast," Sophie said. "A week ago, he wouldn't even let me near his bad leg." Mara nodded. "Horses remember kindness. It's people they struggle with." Sophie glanced sideways. "People can change too, you know." Mara smiled softly, the words meaning more than either of them wanted to say out loud. They stood together in silence, watching Dusty nibble at a patch of clover, his coat shining in the sunlight, his limp nearly gone. As the days shortened, the work grew heavier, but Mara and Sophie slipped into a natural partnership. They mended fences, repaired leaking troughs, and patched the old barn roof, the years of distance shrinking with each shared task. Evenings were spent around the kitchen table, Mara cooking old family recipes, Sophie teasing her about her lack of spice, both of them laughing until tears came. One night, after a long day of chores, Mara found Sophie sitting on the porch, legs curled beneath her, gazing up at the stars. The ranch was quiet, except for the sound of frogs and the distant whinny of horses. Mara settled beside her, pulling a blanket around them both. "I thought I'd feel trapped here," Sophie admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But it feels like I can breathe again." Mara's heart squeezed. "You always belonged here, Soph, no matter how far you ran." Sophie wiped her eyes, embarrassed. "Don't get all sappy on me, Mom." Mara chuckled. "No promises." They sat together for a while, the silence between them comfortable. Mara thought about all the years she'd wasted, nursing grudges, letting pride and pain push her daughter away. She reached for Sophie's hand, and this time Sophie didn't pull away. "You ever think about staying?" Mara asked quietly. Sophie hesitated. "Maybe. I don't know. It's complicated." "You don't have to decide now. Just know you're always welcome. Always." Sophie smiled, a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in years, hope fluttered in her chest, fragile but insistent. Over the next week, their laughter grew more frequent. Mara and Sophie would catch each other's eye over some small mishap, spilled feed, a runaway chicken, and burst into fits of giggles. The horses, Dusty most of all, responded to the warmth, growing calmer, their coats glossier, their eyes brighter. Dusty in particular seemed to thrive. Every day he became more confident, more willing to trust. Mara began gentle exercises, walking him in slow circles, rewarding each step with praise and treats. Sophie joined in, brushing his mane, whispering encouragements, letting herself be drawn into the rhythm of care. The barn became their haven, a place where anger couldn't survive, where old wounds were soothed by routine, laughter, and the shared goal of helping Dusty heal. Mara realized that, in saving the Mustang, she was also saving herself, and maybe, just maybe, saving her relationship with Sophie. One afternoon, as the sun slipped low and painted the fields in gold, Sophie looked around at the ranch, the barn, the horses, her mother bustling in the kitchen, and realized she wanted to stay, at least for a little longer. She wasn't ready to leave this fragile piece behind. That night, after dinner, Sophie turned to Mara as they washed dishes side by side. "I think I'll stick around a while," she said, her voice casual but her eyes shining. "If that's okay." Mara smiled, tears prickling her eyes. "That's more than okay, honey. That's the best news I've heard in years." In the quiet that followed, both women felt something shift, like a bridge rebuilt after a long winter, sturdy and true. Outside, Dusty whinnied softly in the darkness, as if he knew, too, that Willow Creek was finally starting to feel like home again. Autumn at Willow Creek arrived in a blaze of color, the maples blazing orange and red, the air crisp enough to turn breath to mist in the morning. With each passing day, Dusty's limp grew less pronounced, his wounds knitting closed under the steady care of Mara and Sophie. The transformation was slow, sometimes agonizing, but undeniable. The Mustang who had cowered in the auction pen now stood tall in the pasture, nostrils flaring with curiosity rather than fear. The news of Dusty's progress traveled as quickly as Mara's original stunt. People in town speculated about the miracle taking place at the Bennett ranch, but most doubted Dusty would ever be more than a pasture ornament. Walt Hardison, especially, made a point of stopping by at the feed store, his voice loud and dripping with condescension. "Heard you're turning your place into a retirement home for lost causes, Mara," he jeered one morning as Mara picked up a sack of oats. "Maybe you should save yourself a stall." Mara just smiled, letting the words slide off her like rain off a slicker. She had other things to think about. One Saturday morning, as the sun lifted over the fields and painted the barn in gold, Mara sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the local newspaper. Her gaze caught on a notice pinned to the back page. Willow County Fun Show, 3 weeks away. Open class for all ages and horses. Prize for most improved rescue. Mara's heart skipped. She stared at the ad, her mind racing. She didn't want glory, but she wanted the town, the whole world really, to see that second chances were worth the fight. She wanted Dusty to stand in that ring, not as a joke, but as living proof that every soul, horse or human, could heal. Her decision made itself. Sophie came in from the barn, dust streaking her cheeks, hair pulled back in a messy bun. "What's with the face, Mom? You look like you just won the lottery." Mara pushed the paper across the table. "I want to enter Dusty in this." Sophie blinked. "The fun show? Are you sure?" "I'm not expecting him to win," Mara replied, her voice steady. "I just want people to see what he's become. What we've all become, really. Redemption isn't about ribbons. It's about showing up." Sophie hesitated, torn between pride and worry. "You know, he spooks at the smallest thing. The crowd, the noise, it could be too much." Mara nodded. "I know. That's why I need your help. You were always the better writer." Sophie studied her mother, seeing not the stubborn woman she'd been fighting for years, but a partner, someone willing to try and fail and try again. "Okay," she said at last. "Let's do it. But no miracles, all right?" They shook on it, grins breaking through their seriousness. The next day, training began. The first session was rough. Mara led Dusty into the small corral, Sophie at his side with the halter. The mustang's ears flicked nervously at every sound. The clatter of a gate, a distant tractor, even the chirp of a bird. Sophie spoke softly, coaxing him forward, letting him sniff the saddle pad, then draping it gently over his back. At first, Dusty shied, trembling with old fear. Sophie's patience was tested. Her hands shook, her temper flared. "He's never going to trust me if he keeps looking at me like I'm the enemy," she muttered. "Slowly, Soph," Mara urged, keeping her tone low. "Let him set the pace. It's not a race." They worked in short bursts, rewarding every tiny step, standing still for the pad, letting Sophie rub his neck, taking a few halting steps with a rope trailing behind. Each breakthrough felt monumental. Each setback stung. Sometimes Dusty would bolt to the far end of the corral, eyes wide, chest heaving. Sometimes he'd let Sophie rest her hand on his withers for a heartbeat before jerking away. One afternoon, a group of local kids biked past the fence, shouting and laughing. Dusty spooked, nearly unseating Sophie, who'd just swung up for a bareback sit. He darted sideways, and Sophie tumbled into the dust, landing hard on her hip. Mara rushed to her side. "You all right?" Sophie gritted her teeth, rubbing the bruise. "Yeah, that's going to leave a mark." But she looked at Dusty, standing a few yards away, watching them, unsure, and something in her softened. She got up, dusted herself off, and walked back to the horse, her voice gentle. "It's okay, buddy. We both get scared." After that, their teamwork deepened. They learned Dusty's triggers and strengths. He liked being talked to, calmed by soft singing, rewarded with apples and sugar cubes. He flinched at sudden movement, but relaxed when both women worked together, their voices overlapping in reassurance. Mara and Sophie fell into a rhythm, each day blending work and hope. Mara walked Dusty on a long lead, weaving between barrels, while Sophie practiced mounting and dismounting without spooking him. They set up makeshift obstacles, flags, plastic bags tied to posts, even a battered lawn chair, training him to face the unexpected. Some days ended in triumph, Dusty allowing a short ride around the pen. Others ended in frustration, with tears and muttered curses. But slowly, something shifted. Sophie found herself remembering the joy of riding, the thrill of working with a horse who wanted, desperately, to please. Dusty started to anticipate her cues, lowering his head for the halter, standing calmly while she adjusted the reins. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Mara watched Sophie and Dusty circle the pasture. The mustang's stride was still uneven, but his head was up, his ears flicking, his body alive with possibility. Sophie sat tall in the saddle, her confidence returning with each lap. They finished the day with Dusty nuzzling Sophie's shoulder, searching for treats. Mara joined them, hugging her daughter tight. "You did good today," she whispered. Sophie grinned, her face flushed with pride. So did he. So did we. In that golden twilight, the three of them, mother, daughter, and mustang, stood together, united not by perfection, but by persistence. There were only 2 weeks until the show. Anything could happen. But for the first time, hope felt real, alive as the wind rustling through the maples and the promise of redemption glimmering on the horizon. The Willow County Fun Show was now only days away, and for the first time in years, Willow Creek Ranch pulsed with a kind of energy that Mara had almost forgotten. Sophie, too, seemed changed, her stride more purposeful, her voice lighter, her laughter more genuine as she moved through the routines of ranch life. Each morning, they rose before dawn, the ranch awash in a silvery mist, and set about training Dusty with a mix of determination, optimism, and the constant ache of doubt. Progress came in fits and starts. Some days, Dusty surprised them both, moving through obstacles with a new, growing trust, responding to Sophie's cues, tolerating the gentle pressure of the saddle, even allowing Mara to guide him with just a word. On other days, the mustang's old fear returned, raw and unpredictable, and he would bolt or freeze, his eyes wide and wild. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed across the pastures and the scent of cut hay drifted on the breeze, Mara and Sophie decided it was time for a full dress rehearsal. They led Dusty into the training paddock, both women quietly aware that neighbors had started gathering by the fence. Among them stood Walt, arms folded, a thin smile on his lips. "Better get your insurance paid up, Bennett," he called, just loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You'll need it." Mara ignored him, her focus squarely on Dusty, but she saw Sophie's jaw clench. Mara squeezed her daughter's hand, reminding her to stay calm. Sophie mounted Dusty, speaking softly, while Mara steadied him with a hand on his neck. "Ready, boy," Sophie whispered. "Just you and me, like we practiced." The routine began well enough. Dusty moved through cones, sidestepped a tarp, even walked past the fluttering flag that once sent him into a panic. Mara felt hope rising, fragile but real. The neighbors murmured, some surprised, some disappointed at the lack of drama. But just as Sophie turned Dusty toward the next obstacle, a simple wooden bridge, a sudden burst of applause and laughter erupted from the fence line. The sound was sharp, unexpected. Dusty's muscles tensed beneath Sophie, his ears flattened. "Easy," Sophie said, but her own heart was hammering. A plastic grocery bag, caught on the wind, tumbled across the grass toward the pen. Dusty's eyes locked onto it. With a terrified snort, he reared back, Sophie's hands tight on the reins. Mara called out, but it was too late. Dusty bucked hard, Sophie barely hanging on. He spun and bolted, breaking through a section of the fence with a splintering crash. Sophie tumbled to the ground, dust rising around her, the world spinning. For a terrifying moment, Mara's mind blanked. She sprinted to her daughter's side, heart in her throat. "Sophie, Sophie, are you hurt?" Sophie gasped, sitting up slowly, testing her arms and legs. "I'm fine. Just knocked the wind out of me." Her voice was unsteady, but she waved off Mara's panic. Neighbors shouted, some rushing to help, others content to watch the spectacle. Dusty, meanwhile, ran to the far end of the pasture, wild-eyed, pacing along the fence line, trembling. Walt's laughter carried across the field. "Told you, Doc. Should have let that horse go to the killers. You're risking your kid's life for nothing." Mara turned on him, her voice steady but cold. "Get off my land, Walt. Now." He shrugged, feigning innocence, but the crowd began to disperse, their curiosity satisfied for now. Back at the house, Mara checked Sophie for injuries, bruises, a scraped elbow, but nothing broken. Still, the accident had rattled them both. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, silent, her eyes fixed on her shaking hands. "Why are we doing this, Mom?" she blurted at last. "Why do you always chase lost causes? This isn't just about Dusty. It's about you, about needing to fix something no one else wants fixed. Why can't you let go?" Mara hesitated, the words stinging deeper than any wound. She poured tea, her hands trembling. "I can't explain it, Sophie. Maybe because I know what it feels like to be written off. I lost your dad. I lost you for a while. If I quit on Dusty now, I'm quitting on myself. On us." Sophie shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "I'm scared, Mom. Not just for Dusty. For you, for us. What if we fail again?" Mara sat beside her, reaching for her hand. We might fail, but isn't it better to try than to wonder forever what could have been? I don't want to live afraid of failing anymore." Sophie leaned against her mother, letting the tears come, the old anger bleeding out, replaced by exhaustion and a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, she let Mara comfort her. They sat together in the quiet, the house holding them close, the storm inside slowly passing. That night, after the world had gone dark and the only sounds were crickets and the distant sigh of the wind, Mara and Sophie went out to the barn together. Dusty stood in the corner of his stall, sides heaving, sweat streaked across his coat. Mara spoke to him softly, holding out her hand, her patience infinite. Sophie joined her, voice hoarse but steady. "Hey boy, it's all right. We're not giving up on you." Dusty eyed them both, then stepped forward, just one hesitant step. Mara offered him an apple slice. After a long moment, he took it from her palm. They stayed with him until the moon was high, whispering reassurances, promising that tomorrow was another chance. That night, as Mara drifted to sleep, she knew the road ahead would be hard. But she also knew, deep in her bones, that sometimes hope was a stubborn thing, and the only way through fear was forward, together. The day of the Willow County Fun Show dawned clear and bright, sunlight spilling over the fields like hope itself. Mara was up before the roosters crow, nerves jittering beneath her skin. She brewed coffee in the quiet kitchen, glancing out the window every few minutes to watch the mist lift from the pasture, where Dusty grazed with his head held high. The bruises of yesterday's setback had faded, replaced by a tense excitement that electrified the entire ranch. Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her hands already calloused and stained from weeks of training. She managed a wry smile. "You ready for the circus, Mom?" Mara grinned, setting down a mug for her. About as ready as I'll ever be. Think we'll get laughed out of the arena? Probably, Sophie shrugged, but there was laughter in her voice now. But at least we'll go out swinging. After breakfast, they moved through their routine with silent teamwork, checking Dusty's hooves, brushing out his coat until it shone, running gentle hands down the length of his legs to check for tenderness. The horse watched them with those deep, intelligent eyes, calm now, but alert. Mara fed him a carrot and stroked his muzzle. "You're going to show them all what second chances look like," she whispered. The trailer ride to the fairgrounds was mercifully short, but every mile felt heavy. They passed fields golden with late autumn corn, then the outskirts of town, where signs announced the fun show in painted letters. When they arrived, the grounds were already buzzing with trucks and horse trailers, riders warming up their glossy, high-stepping mounts, children in sequined shirts parading ponies, and old-timers leaning against fence rails swapping stories. As Mara backed the trailer into place, she felt the eyes of half the county on her. She could hear snatches of gossip. "That's the Bennett woman, the one with the wild mustang," mixed with laughter, some sympathetic, some cruel. Walt was already there, his expensive gelding gleaming like polished mahogany. He sauntered over, hat tipped back, a smug smile fixed on his face. "Morning, Mara," Walt drawled. "Didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Hope you brought a first aid kit." Sophie stepped between them, voice cool as steel. "We're not here to impress you, Walt." He laughed, unbothered. "Don't worry. You won't." Sophie rolled her eyes and turned away, busying herself with Dusty. Mara took a steadying breath and focused on her horse. If they were going to do this, it would be together. The showgrounds were a patchwork of activity, barrel racing in one arena, a jumping course set up nearby, kids showing off goats and chickens. The rescue horse class was scheduled for the late morning, and Mara could feel the anticipation building like a storm cloud. She walked Dusty around the warm-up ring, Sophie at his side, both speaking softly to the horse, letting him get used to the noise, the unfamiliar scents, the flapping banners and loudspeakers. Dusty was nervous, but not panicked. He sidestepped when a balloon popped, snorted at the sight of a miniature donkey, but each time Sophie's hand steadied him, he relaxed, taking comfort in her presence. Mara marveled at how far they'd come, from the broken, trembling creature at the auction to this moment of grace under pressure. When their number was finally called, Mara's heart thudded so loudly she thought the whole crowd could hear it. The arena looked enormous from the entry gate, bleachers full, judges watching from behind a table, Walt and his friends lounging at the rail. Sophie took the reins, mounting Dusty with a quiet confidence. Mara led them in, head held high, willing herself not to see the skeptical faces, the cell phones raised for what everyone expected to be a spectacle. The class began with a simple walk around the ring. Dusty's steps were tentative, but he kept his head up, ears flicking as Mara murmured encouragement. The crowd was silent at first, holding its collective breath, waiting for disaster. Walt muttered something under his breath, but Mara ignored him, every ounce of focus on Dusty. Next came the obstacle course, poles to weave through, a blue tarp to cross, a mailbox to open. The crowd tittered as Dusty hesitated at the tarp, but Sophie leaned low, whispering, "You got this, buddy." Mara steadied him from the ground, her voice a quiet anchor. With a deep breath, Dusty stepped forward, hoof touching the edge of the tarp. He paused, shivered, then walked across, Sophie grinning wide. The crowd gasped, then clapped politely. One by one, they worked through the obstacles. Dusty balked at the mailbox, sidestepped a cone, but with each small victory, confidence blossomed. Mara caught Sophie's eye, pride surging in her chest. Finally came the freestyle portion. Anything goes, a chance for each rescue to shine. Sophie guided Dusty in a slow circle, then dropped the reins and stood on his back, arms spread wide like a circus rider. Dusty didn't bolt. He didn't shy. He simply stood, steady and calm, as the crowd erupted in honest, surprised applause. Mara felt tears sting her eyes, not just for the horse, but for her daughter, for herself, for everyone who'd ever been told they were too broken to try again. She looked over at Walt, who was silent now, his smirk faded. When the class ended, the judge walked over, hat in hand. "That was some fine work, ladies. Shows what a little hope and a lot of hard work can do." As they walked Dusty out of the arena, Sophie leaned down and hugged Mara tight. "We did it, Mom. We really did it." The crowd parted to let them through, many nodding in respect. Some even clapped them on the back. Mara felt the burden of years lighten. She saw Walt tip his hat, not quite a smile but something close, respect, or maybe the first glimmer of understanding. Back at the trailer, Mara wrapped her arms around Sophie, then Dusty, whispering, "No matter what happens next, this is enough." As the sun arced high and laughter rang across the fairgrounds, Mara realized that sometimes the hardest battles weren't about winning a prize, but about showing up, facing down doubt, and proving you belong. For the first time in years, she believed they did. The applause from the Willow County Fun Show still echoed in Mara's mind as she drove the trailer back up the winding road to Willow Creek Ranch. Dusty stood quietly in the back, ears twitching, head held higher than ever. Sophie rode up front with Mara, both of them grinning, exhausted, exhilarated, and filled with a new kind of energy. For the first time in years, hope felt contagious. It didn't matter that they hadn't taken home a ribbon or a prize. What they'd won was so much bigger: pride, respect, and the courage to dream again. By the next morning, news of Dusty's transformation and the mother-daughter team behind it was everywhere. The local paper, the Willow Gazette, ran a headline, "From auction reject to county star, a Mustang's second chance." The article, penned by Miss Maggie, an old friend of Mara's and a pillar of the community, told the story in vivid detail, painting Mara and Sophie as the beating heart of a ranch with room for broken things to heal. It wasn't long before the phone started ringing. At first, it was just neighbors calling with congratulations, but soon, people from nearby towns were reaching out too. Some wanted advice for their own troubled horses. Others offered words of encouragement. A few even hinted they'd be willing to donate supplies or funds if Mara and Sophie ever wanted to make Willow Creek into a real rescue. That seed of an idea grew quickly. One evening, after supper, Miss Maggie came by with a plate of peach cobbler and a stack of flyers. She set them on the kitchen table, eyes sparkling behind her glasses. "You've started something good here, Mara. People want to help. Why not let them?" Mara was hesitant. The ranch was barely making ends meet as it was, and she'd never asked anyone for help before. Sophie saw her mother's doubt and reached across the table. "Mom, we did something amazing with Dusty. Imagine what we could do for more horses, for more people like us who just need a place to start over." Mara looked at her daughter, the girl she'd almost lost, now her partner in this wild dream, and nodded. "Okay, let's do it. But only if we do it together." Within a week, Willow Creek was buzzing with activity. Miss Maggie and her friends organized a barn-raising fundraiser at the community center. People donated hay bales, old tack, lumber for new stalls. Kids painted signs and posters, drawing pictures of Dusty with hearts and stars. A local bakery pledged half its pie sales for the month to the ranch. Even Walt Hardison, silent but not unkind, sent over a load of fencing panels. No note, just the quiet gesture of a man who'd witnessed something change at the fun show. Mara and Sophie worked non-stop. They cleaned up the back pasture, repaired fences, and converted an old equipment shed into a cozy recovery stall. Dusty seemed to sense the shift in mood. He greeted every visitor with a soft nicker, his calm presence helping to reassure the skittish new arrivals. A starved paint mare from a sheriff's seizure. A blind pony surrendered by a widow who could no longer care for him. Even a little donkey who'd outlived his usefulness in the next county. Word spread. Soon, people were stopping by every weekend, curious to see the ranch that had the Mustang with the story. Mara and Sophie hosted their first open house, expecting only a few folks to show. Instead, the drive filled with cars and pickup trucks, families and old-timers, local teens, and even a TV news van from the city. Sophie printed out before and after photos of Dusty and set up a table with information about responsible horse ownership. Mara gave barn tours, showing off the new stalls and talking about what it meant to earn a horse's trust. Miss Maggie managed a bake sale and raffled off a quilt sewn with images of Dusty, Willow Creek's new mascot. During the open house, Mara stood in the paddock, Dusty at her side, and told their story. She talked about second chances, not just for horses but for people, about loss and loneliness, and how hard it was to ask for help, about the power of persistence, forgiveness, and small acts of courage. Her voice shook, but the crowd listened, some with tears in their eyes. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, families lingered in the shade of the big sycamore, children feeding treats to Dusty, volunteers asking what more they could do. One woman, a mother whose teenage son had lost his way, asked if he could spend weekends helping with chores. An elderly veteran who missed the feel of a horse's breath on his hands offered to teach groundwork to any volunteers willing to learn. Mara realized their dream was no longer just about saving horses. It was about building a sanctuary, a place where broken hearts could mend. Late that night, as the last car rumbled down the drive, Mara and Sophie sat on the porch, watching the horses graze beneath the stars. Sophie leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "We did it, Mom. Willow Creek is more than just our home now. It's something bigger." Mara wrapped an arm around her daughter. "I couldn't have done it without you, or Dusty, or this whole crazy, wonderful community." As the crickets sang and the soft night breeze carried the scent of hay and hope, Mara knew she'd finally found what she'd been searching for. Not just a way to save Dusty, but a way to save herself, her family, and maybe a few lost souls along the way. The ranch was no longer just a place to survive. It was a place to begin again. Autumn faded into the soft chill of early winter, the air tinged with wood smoke, the nights lengthening. Willow Creek Ranch, once silent and solitary, now hummed with quiet purpose. The sanctuary had become a living, breathing place, filled with horses in all shades and sizes, volunteers working side by side, and the endless possibility of renewal. But even in the warm glow of their new mission, Mara knew that healing, for horses and for people, was not a straight line. It was a winding path of small victories, setbacks, and lessons learned along the way. One gray morning, Mara walked the fence line, hands deep in her jacket pockets, breath clouding in the air. She stopped at the main pasture, where Dusty grazed contentedly with the others. He looked stronger now, his coat thick and shiny, muscles filling out where bones had once protruded. A trio of young rescues, skittish and uncertain, hovered near him. Dusty, calm, and unbothered, greeted them with a soft nicker, letting them come close, offering the comfort he'd once needed himself. Watching him, Mara felt a deep sense of pride, but also a humility that surprised her. She'd expected the ranch to change the horses they took in, but she hadn't foreseen how much it would change her. Later, in the barn, Sophie was working with a paint mare named Lila. Lila had arrived thin and scared, flinching at every movement. Day by day, Sophie coaxed her closer with apples and patience, teaching her to trust again. The process was slow, sometimes frustrating, but Sophie never lost her gentle persistence. She glanced over her shoulder as Mara entered. "She let me pick up her foot today," Sophie said, her smile both proud and tired. "First time since she got here." "That's huge," Mara replied, crossing the barn to help. They worked in easy silence, cleaning stalls and checking on the other horses. Between them, the bitterness of the past had softened. Arguments still happened, about money, about chores, about who was more stubborn, but now the words passed quickly, leaving no lasting wounds. As the afternoon light slanted through the barn windows, Mara sat with Sophie on a bale of hay, watching Dusty and Lila doze side by side in the paddock. The peace between them was hard won, and Mara felt compelled to break the silence. "You know," she began, voice low, "I used to think healing was about fixing what was broken, making things perfect again. But that's not it. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard. It's the little steps, not the big leaps. Persistence, not perfection." Sophie nodded, drawing her knees to her chest. "It's hard to let go of the idea that things will ever go back to the way they were. Sometimes I still get so angry about everything. Dad leaving, me leaving, you being so stubborn." She laughed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "But then I look at Dusty, or Lila, or any of these horses, and I see how far they've come, how far we've come." Mara reached over, squeezing Sophie's hand. "We can't change the past, but we get to decide what comes next." That night, the sanctuary hosted a small gathering for the volunteers and their families. People brought chili and cornbread, homemade pies, thermoses of spiced cider. The barn was strung with twinkle lights, music playing softly from an old radio. Mara stood at the center, sharing a few words of thanks and a toast to second chances and the courage to take them. She saw Sophie laughing with a group of teens by the tack room, and Dusty, head poking out of his stall, basking in the attention of the younger children. As the night wore on, an older man, one of the new volunteers, a veteran named Ed, sat with Mara on the porch, watching the stars. "You know, Doc," he said, his voice rough but kind, "you've built something real here. Not just for these animals, but for people like me, too. Folks who needed somewhere to belong." Mara smiled, humbled. "I think we all needed a place to start over. Turns out horses and people aren't so different." When the guests left and the ranch grew quiet again, Mara and Sophie did their final check of the barn. They paused by Dusty's stall. The mustang lifted his head, calm and confident, as if he knew he belonged here now. Mara stroked his muzzle. "You're the heart of this place, you know," she whispered. Sophie smiled. "He is. But you are too." That night, as she settled into bed, Mara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The long road from despair to hope, from loneliness to belonging. She understood now that healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that required showing up, loving fiercely, and believing in tomorrow, even when the past tried to pull you back. Before sleep claimed her, Mara whispered a promise to the darkness. "We'll keep showing up, for Dusty, for Sophie, for everyone who needs a second chance. Outside, the stars blazed over Willow Creek, and in the barn, Dusty greeted the newest arrivals with calm acceptance, ready to show them, just as Mara and Sophie had shown him, that healing, though hard, was possible, and hope, once sparked, could light the way for others. Winter at Willow Creek arrived with quiet snowfalls and a serenity that seemed to settle into the bones of the land. The sanctuary's fences were draped in white, the barn warm with lantern light, laughter, and the steady, reassuring sounds of horses moving in their stalls. Willow Creek had become something no one, least of all Mara, had imagined a year ago. A place not just for rescued animals, but for people in need of second chances, too. In the weeks after the first open house, the trickle of visitors and volunteers became a steady stream. Teachers brought their students to meet Dusty and the other horses, telling them the story of how a hopeless case had changed an entire community. Veterans stopped by to help with chores, finding peace in the rhythm of barn life. Single mothers and runaways, people whose lives had veered off course, came to Willow Creek for work, for refuge, for the feeling of being part of something bigger. Mara and Sophie, once tangled in old wounds, now moved as a team. Each morning began with shared coffee in the kitchen, reviewing the day's tasks, swapping stories about the people and horses who had found their way to Willow Creek. Sophie kept an online journal, her words honest, raw, sometimes funny, and sometimes full of pain. Her posts resonated beyond the county line, drawing attention and donations from animal lovers and advocates across the state. They expanded the ranch slowly, never losing sight of the mission. Walt Hardison, who had once laughed at Mara's hope, now helped deliver hay each month, quietly checking fences and sometimes lingering just long enough to scratch Dusty's neck. Even the town council, once skeptical, approved a small grant to help Willow Creek become an official sanctuary. Local businesses donated supplies, and high schoolers volunteered after class, learning how to care for the horses, and sometimes how to care for themselves. One Saturday, Mara and Sophie traveled to a neighboring town to speak at a rescue horse conference. Mara hated public speaking, but she knew the story needed to be told. As they stood in front of a crowd of strangers, Sophie squeezed her mother's hand and whispered, "Just speak from the heart." Mara took a deep breath. "When I bought Dusty at the auction, people thought I was crazy. They told me he wasn't worth saving. Maybe they thought I wasn't either. But what I've learned is that redemption isn't about never failing. It's about showing up, loving fiercely, and believing in new beginnings. Not just for horses, but for people too." She told them about the setbacks, the doubts, the small victories that built their new life. She spoke about forgiveness, persistence, and the humility that comes with asking for help and offering it. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet, clapping not for a victory, but for a journey they recognized as their own. Back at Willow Creek, life followed the gentle pulse of the seasons. New arrivals came and went: a frightened stallion from a bankrupt farm, a motherless foal, a mare whose racing days were behind her. Dusty, once broken and terrified, now greeted every newcomer with a steady calm, leading by example and by quiet presence. He had become the heart of the sanctuary, steady, wise, and gentle with even the most wounded. Sophie started a weekend mentorship program, inviting at-risk teens and young adults to spend time at the ranch. Some had lost parents, some had lost faith in themselves. But at Willow Creek, surrounded by open sky and the quiet trust of the horses, they found space to heal. Mara watched these young people brush Dusty's mane, muck stalls, or simply sit in the pasture, silent, and knew the ranch was fulfilling a promise greater than anything she dared to dream. One evening, during a volunteer appreciation dinner, Miss Maggie stood up to speak. "This place," she said, "is proof that the world is full of second chances. Not everyone gets to see the fruits of their hope, but Willow Creek is living proof that hope is worth fighting for." "Thank you, Mara, thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Dusty." The barn echoed with applause, laughter, and the clink of mugs raised in celebration. Mara and Sophie stood together, arms linked, hearts full. Walt lingered at the edge of the crowd, nodding to Mara with a rare, genuine smile. As the night deepened and the last guests drifted home, Mara walked the pasture one last time, Dusty following at her side. She looked up at the stars, feeling the vastness of the world and the warmth of what they'd built together. She remembered her own journey, the loneliness, the failures, the stubborn hope that refused to die, and felt gratitude for every painful step along the way. Standing in the moonlight, Mara spoke softly, her words for Dusty, for Sophie, and for anyone listening. We all deserve a second chance. Even when we're broken, even when the world says it's too late, there's still hope. And if you can't find it, maybe you can help someone else find theirs. From that day on, Willow Creek's gates were open to all, the lost, the weary, the hopeful, and the broken. The ranch became a place of belonging, fueled by the simple truth that healing is possible, one act of kindness at a time. And as Mara, Sophie, and Dusty traveled to tell their story at local events and schools, they carried a message that resonated far beyond the ranch. Redemption isn't about never failing. It's about showing up, loving fiercely, and believing in new beginnings for anyone, horse or human. So if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, follow, and share. Because out there, someone is waiting for their second chance. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one to offer it.